Hello and welcome to another Love Reading for Kids author event. My name's Joy Court and I'm part of the editorial team at Love Reading for Kids. I am very excited to be joined today by author Chibundo Onuzo and Millie and Lucas from Kingsnorth Church of England Primary School in Kent. And I know they are very excited to be doing their first author interview. But before we start, let me tell you a little bit more about Chibundo. She was born in Lagos, Nigeria, but moved to England as a teenager and now lives in London. She started writing novels and short stories at the age of 10 and less than a decade later became the youngest woman ever signed by Faber, which is a very famous publisher. She signed the deal for her first book, The Spider King's Daughter, at 19, and it won the Betty Trask Award. Welcome to Lagos was published in 2016, and in 2018 she was elected as Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Her third novel for adults, Sankofa, was published to great acclaim in 2021, and it was selected for the Reese Witherspoon Book Club. But Mayowa and the Sea of Words is her debut children's novel. This is going to be published by Bloomsbury on June the 20th. It's a dazzlingly original and imaginative fantasy, the first in a projected trilogy. And what is more, it's a wonderful allegory about the power of words, has great characters dealing with real world issues in a fantastically creative way. And if that were not enough, it has footnotes too. There's nothing I love more than a book with witty and helpful footnotes. Now, I know our young reading ambassadors were as thrilled as I was to get an early peek at this brilliant book, and I know they have some great questions lined up for you, Chibundo. But first, perhaps Millie and Lucas, will you tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you came to be picked as reading ambassadors?
So my name is Millie, and I'm in year 5 in Mrs. Knox class. And I like reading because you can sort of forget about reality and get into a book, and it's almost like you're in the book, and you can the book, because of author's wonderful writing, you can feel what the characters are feeling. That's why I like reading.
Fantastic. How about you, Lucas?
Well, I'm Lucas. I'm in year 5. I'm 10. I came to like books because it's sort of like a holiday in your head, but sometimes there's a sudden storm and you have to find a way to overcome it. Personally, my favourite books are war related, such as fighter jets and World War II.
That sounds brilliant. I can tell you're both really accomplished readers. So do you want to kick off with your questions then? Who's going first?
How does it feel to be a published author?
How does it feel to be a published author? First of all, really nice to meet you guys. This is my first interview for this book, so you're a proper journalist now. How does it feel? Well, I don't really think of myself as a published author. I am published, but publication is only a very small part of being a writer. So books take years to write. And so most of the time, you are just sitting by yourself at home, tapping away at a story. And then once every 3 years or 4 years, you get to meet readers like yourself, and they ask you interesting questions. So I think of myself more as a writer than as a published writer, because publication is only like a very small part of the writing process.
Which books did you love to read as a child?
Which books did I love to read? I'm looking at one of them now, actually. I love the Chronicles of Narnia. I love that series. I think my favorite one was The Horse and His Boy. I thought that was really funny. Read some Enid Blyton. I liked Mallory Towers, actually. that series. It's set in I don't know if you guys know, it's in a girls' boarding school in England. And then for Nigerian authors, there was a book called Yoruba Girl Dancing, which was about a Nigerian girl who goes to an English boarding school. So I had a thing for English boarding school stories. Anne of Green Gables. What other books? I think what I found missing, looking back as an adult, was that I didn't read enough books for children by African authors. And so yes, I suppose I'm trying to write my own with Mayowa and the Sea of Words.
So you didn't find yourself in the books?
Well, I found aspects of myself. I mean, so that's the beauty of literature. So like the parts of yourself are not only cultural or skin color related. There's also, if you enjoy pranks, then, the boarding school books are good for those. If you enjoy adventure and fantasy and all of that, the Narnia series are great for that. So there were parts of myself I definitely found in those books. But when it came to things like culture or language and like the names of characters, no, I didn't see myself. Yeah.
What or who really helped you at school to develop your love for books?
So my parents are really, really good. Both my parents are readers. My mom, I think even more so. So part of why I read so many British books was because my mother grew up when Nigeria was still part of the British Empire. And so those were the books that were recommended to her as a child. Books like Enid Blyton or, Dickens or whoever, Charles Dickens. And then when she had her own children, she just gave us the same books that she read as a child, which is a sort of like an easy way to do it. And so yeah, my mom bought us a lot of books. I didn't have access as much to libraries. So I was a member of one or two libraries, but they were very strict. You could only borrow one book at a time. So if you have a library where you can borrow more than one book, you're fortunate. So we could only borrow one book. So she ended up buying more books for us, because when you can only borrow one book, it's kind of like slow going. You borrow one, read it, return it, go and borrow another one. So yeah, my parents, but my mom in particular.
Have you always loved to read and write?
Well, always a long time. Obviously, I was not born reading and writing, or else I would be a genius and I would have built a spaceship by now or something. But I have enjoyed it for a long time. I love what you said about both of you said about how books can help you escape. I think one of you said the holiday in your head. And that's sort of that's how books are. You can just be in one place and be instantly transported to another world. And also growing up, it's funny, I think I probably read more than I watched television. There is a sort of like magic that comes with books. You don't feel like you've traveled to a place in the same way when you watch something than when you read something. There is a sort of, magic to it.
Reading's definitely magic.
We've noticed that you moved to the UK as a teenager. Can you explain it to us in the ways that what your world changed and life changed because of this? Has this informed your writing?
So yes, I moved to England when I was 14 and ended up going to a boarding school. So it wasn't Mallory Towers, I can tell you. So in Mallory Towers, they used to have midnight feasts. And I was very sure that I was going to have midnight feasts, and there were no midnight feasts. You weren't allowed to eat at night. You had to go to bed. But I've been to England as a child several times, but visiting somewhere is very different from living there. And funny enough, I'd never been in winter, so we'd always come in our summer holidays. So first of all, it was very cold. It was very, very cold. And I remember the first time I saw snow. I probably saw snow for the first time as a teenager outside of the film. So that was quite exciting as well. Um, what effect did it have on me? I think it made me more conscious about my cultural heritage. So I grew up in Nigeria. Everybody around me was Nigerian. Everybody around me was Black, African. And so I sort of took it for granted. And there was nothing different about me because everybody was African or Nigerian. And so like coming to England, I was suddenly in a space where there was something different about me. And so like a lot of people, for example, had never heard a name like Chibundu. Whereas in like Nigeria, that's not an uncommon name. Like I'm not the only Chibundu I know. And so at that young age, sort of having to sort of constantly explain yourself. I think it was both positive and negative. So the positive was that it made me sort of more proudly Nigerian. So I could say, this is what my culture is about. And I had to push back. And I think this was the negative part. A lot of people didn't know very much about Nigeria. So for example, people would be surprised that we spoke English. And you know, like obviously if you grew up in Nigeria, you'd never be surprised that Nigerians speak English because Nigeria used to be part of the British Empire. So English was forced on us. And so now we speak English. So things like that. There was a lot of people didn't know. And I mean, sometimes from a negative place, but sometimes just from ignorance. They just didn't know. But I started setting my fiction. I started setting my writing in Nigeria after I moved. Because again, I just became more proudly Nigerian. And like I was like, yeah, Nigeria is the best. The bee's knees.
This
Is it
next,
hard,
oh, sorry.
is it harder to write for children than for adults?
It's different. I don't know if it's harder, but I feel like children are very tough customers. I think you guys are very tough readers. So I read a lot of children's books before and while I was writing Mayowa and the Sea of Words. And with children's books, you have to get straight to the action. All the successful ones I read anyway, from chapter 1, you have to get straight to the story. Whereas like, I feel like adults will give you a chance. They'll give you like the first 20 pages or the first 30 pages. But like, if a child doesn't like a book by like page 2, like you may not, I mean, even page 1, maybe, they may just be like, next. And also, or they might, I don't know, go and watch YouTube or go and watch something else. So I think, yeah, children are tough customers. So you're actually my first children readers that I've spoken to. So after you finish asking me questions, I want to know what, I want to ask you some questions.
Your story includes characters who are refugees. Do you think that telling them their stories in books will help children to better understand challenges that refugees have to face?
So that's not why I included Hamza in the story. It's so funny, we were talking about it after after the book was done. I was having this conversation. And I think of Hamza as Mayowa's friend first. And that is his role in the book, to be a friend to Mayowa, and for Mayowa to learn and grow, and for him to learn, and both of them to learn and grow through their friendship with each other. And I don't think of him primarily first as a refugee. He is, but I like something that, I love how I'm saying I like something as if I didn't write it, but I still like something that Mayowa's mom says when she says Hamza is not a refugee. He's a person who needs refuge. And yeah, I sort of sympathize with that in the sense that my father lived through a war in Nigeria. He wasn't as young as Hamza. He was a teenager during the civil war in Nigeria. And my father would never call himself a war survivor, like just never. That he would never think of himself in that way. He is a person who has survived a war, yes, but he doesn't sort of think of himself in that way because, you know, he's many other things as well. And I think that, yeah, that was my main thing with Hamza. And of course, the refugee crisis is a theme in the book. But I hope what readers get more from it is just like Hamza and Mayowa are friends and they argue and they can both be obnoxious and rude to each other and they're not perfect children. And yeah.
I think it's really clear, actually, the characterization of both Mayowa and Hamza. They are very real children, and it's so clear to the reader. You know, they're not. Hamza is not there for a purpose. He is there as a person, as a friend, and that's what matters. And I think you did that absolutely brilliantly.
Thank you.
Sorry, carry on.
What advice can you give to us to help our friends who do not yet love to read?
Tell them they're missing out. They are 100% missing out. Most of the best stories, and I guess people watch a lot of TV and films now. I mean, in the past 50 years or so, that's sort of been the case. But most of the best stories have started off as books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if they want to get to the original source, they have to go to the books. And I think what's so marvelous about books is that you get to do some of the creating yourself and some of the imagination yourself. And so it's interesting. It's always interesting when you see a book that has then been turned into a film or a TV series. And there's so much argument and debate because everyone is like, well, that's not what the person looked like in my head. Because everybody goes away and creates their own version of the book. And so, yeah, there's that feeling of, yeah, you create with the author. And I mean, I don't know what Mayowa looks like to you, but I mean, I've described her, but I'm sure if we all had to sit down and then draw Mayowa. I mean, the problem is there's an illustration on the front of the book, but okay, cover the illustration on the front of the book. And if we all had to sit down and draw Mayowa or draw Mayowa's father, we'd all come up with sort of different looking people because you've created some of the character and what they look like in your mind.
Mm.
I also think that when books are being changed into films, film misses out a lot of events that have happened in the books.
Yes.
It's a much deeper experience, isn't it, reading the book? Yeah. Well, I think the descriptions you gave of why you like reading at the beginning were the best I've heard for so long. I mean, that phrase, having a holiday in your head, I want that on a poster. Libraries everywhere. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Just going to copyright that for Lucas.
I think you should.
How did you develop your idea for Mayowa to have special powers to jump on books?
So, I mean, I've been thinking about it because people have been asking me a lot. So I think the idea came from God. I'm a Christian. So I think there was a sort of like divine inspiration because I'm pretty sure it's all lost in the mists and sands of time. But I'm pretty sure I had a dream where there was an older man jumping on a book barefoot, and there was a young girl who was watching, and there was some sort of like teaching going on. But you know, sort of how dreams are fuzzy, and when you wake up, it's not clear exactly. But I remember having this image in a dream of this older man jumping on a book barefoot and this young girl looking on. So I think that's where the main seed for the book came. But also, so my mom told me a story. Her dad was a massive reader as well and bought her lots of books and introduced her to so many books. And my mom told me a story that when she was young, so the only time her father ever beat her, so this is common in Nigeria, parents beat their children for discipline. And the only time, and so it's rare that she was only ever beaten once. Generally, it would happen more regularly. And the only time in her entire childhood her dad ever beat her was when she defaced when she destroyed a book. I think she tore off the cover, or she did something terrible to it. And her dad was like, books are precious and you must never, ever do that to books. And so I think somewhere in my subconscious, my mom told me this story when I was a child because I threw a book down the stairs and she didn't beat me, but she told me the story and she was like, the only time my father ever beat me was when I defaced a book. And so I'm not going to beat you, but never, ever, ever do that again. And so I think Mayowa's mom's response to her jumping on books is probably based on my mom. And my mom is she's not happy with this jumping on books thing. Like, I'm actually not joking. She's not happy. She's like, don't make little children over the world start jumping on books. I'm like, what? Yeah, she's not happy.
Did you write the book to help children how to manage emotions? Because sometimes quite big and tricky.
I mean, it's not just children that need help managing their emotions. It's something that throughout life you sort of need to learn how to do. And it's definitely something that I was thinking about as I was writing the book. There's this phrase that I repeat often, or what the characters repeat, like getting on top of the emotions before they get on top of you. And that sort of struggle not to be overpowered by emotions in any direction, either positively or negatively. And that sort of Mayowa has to learn how to calibrate and how to make her logos altering powers more precise so that she doesn't overpower people with joy, or even when she's channeling the so-called positive emotions, still not to knock people off their feet with laughter. So yeah, it was something that I was thinking about, and it's something that it's not just children, everybody needs to learn how to manage their big emotions. I think what's helpful about children actually is that children generally express their emotions. And this is when you hang out with children a lot, they express their emotions. And it's true, you have to learn how to express your emotions in a healthy way. But it's important not to stop expressing your emotions. And I think sometimes what happens with adults is that you may never have learned how to manage the big emotions, and then you stop expressing them. And then that's also not very good, because it's like a volcano. And if you don't express, at some point, you explode. So yeah, emotions are very interesting.
Did you choose the plot of the boat bill, as this mirrors what we see on the news with Stop the Boats?
It's so interesting, because this is what I'm telling you. Books take years to write, right? And I've had this idea for a long time. And it's been something I've been thinking of. So before I wrote Mayowa and the Sea of Words, I wrote a short story about, well, it was for adults, about a man who starts rescuing refugees who are drowning, because he just thinks this is the right thing to do. There's a famous moment in British history called Dunkirk, where Allied soldiers, British soldiers, were rescued from a beach in France, and some of them were literally pulled out of the water. And so for him, he sees this as a similar event. And I started writing this story maybe like a decade ago now, and it's finished. I still have it on my laptop, and I tried to get it published, and I couldn't get it published. Nobody would publish it. I sent it to so many places. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes writers, you look at the world and you say, this is not where the world is now, but with the language and the way people are talking about this issue, this is where we're going to end up if you're not careful. And it's so interesting, my sister sent me something that apparently a politician had said, where someone asked him, so do you think we should let refugees drown? And he basically said, yes. And 5 years ago, he would not have been able to say that in public, And so the language over time keeps changing. And so it's funny because I don't want to be right, but I have seen how the language around sort of helping people who are in dire circumstances and in terrible circumstances, it has changed. It's definitely changed over the last decade. And yeah, sometimes writers, that's what you do. You look, I'm trying to think what's like, and it's like sort of like when your teacher tells you at the start of the year, if you keep on not doing your homework and not paying attention in class, this is where you're going to end up. And then if you don't do your homework and you don't pay attention, and then you end up there at the end of the year. And sometimes being a writer is like that. You're just sort of like, no, everybody, can't you see what's happening?
So it's almost as if the world has come around to mirror what you were writing.
Yes.
Which is a sort of coincidence, really, but it makes the book extremely timely and topical, and because it's written for children, so accessible as well. Did it make you think about the issue differently?
I still think that they should be allowed to come for safety.
That's very, very good. Yeah.
I think that because all humans are equal, we should all treat each other the same and help each other when everyone's in need of help. No matter what color you are, whatever religion you are, it doesn't matter because we're all humans, we're all equal. So stopping boats coming over, I mean, yes, people are having to share homes with refugees, but we are all equal. So
That's very well put. Thank you.
I think that's what I like about children is that, I mean, you guys, you smaller people, is that you're very clear. You have a certain like clarity on what sometimes you think as an adult should be obvious. It's sort of like if you saw someone, most people, if you saw someone at the beach in trouble, drowning, most people would run towards them to try and help them out. Like you wouldn't even think about it. It's sort of just exactly what you said. It's another human being and they're in trouble. And yeah, most people, and I mean, I've seen it. I've been at the beach once when somebody has been in trouble. And yes, you just see strangers. It's almost just a natural human impulse to help someone if they're in trouble. And it's not about legislation. It's not about immigration. It's about what do you do? What's your natural response when another human being is in a life and death situation? That's what is the core of the issue. It's not politics. It's basic human nature.
Was it important to you that one of the characters was blind? If so, why?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, why did I make Mayowa's mother blind? I mean, I've never written a blind character before this. But what I was reflecting on about my childhood, and it's the first time someone has asked me about this. But I had to think about it. So yeah, these are good questions, guys. Well done. I was thinking about how children relate to difference and how actually, generally, when you're a child, somebody probably has to point out the difference to you before you're like, oh, I should treat this person differently. So when I was growing up, I had an aunt who lived with us. And our cousins also lived with us. And first of all, now I know not everybody grew up with their cousins and their aunties all living in the same house with them. But then that was what was in my house. And so I didn't think to question it. And I enjoyed it. There's nothing wrong with it. But my aunt in particular, she had a very severe mental health condition, which in another context, she might have been put in hospital for. And as an adult, my mom told me that she had this severe mental health condition. And I was like, really? I never noticed. And that's sort of how children are. And I love that again, Mayowa's relationship with her mom is not about her mom being blind. It's not about like, she's just her mom. And in the same way, my aunt was just my aunt. And I look back on our interactions and like she lived with us. We hung out together. And yeah, it again, now when I look back as an adult, I think, okay, I can see that. But as a child, I was just like, that's my aunt. Yeah.
We noticed that on some of the pages there are footnotes. What made you use these?
What made me use this? Well, I thought they were funny. So like in the early, I like funny children's books. So that's part of why I love The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe. I also love Edith, I think E. Nesbit, The Phoenix and the Carpet and Five Children and It. They're just really funny. And like, that's also what I love about children. Because I have a lot of nieces and nephews and they're hilarious. Like 1 minute, like they're weeping and wailing over like, I don't know, you took the Nintendo from them or you this, that, and the other. And then the next minute, like somebody does a fart and then they're rolling on the floor with laughter. And I'm just like, it must be so interesting to be you. Because, and I think the topics in Mayowa and the Sea of Words can be seen as heavy, and maybe they are, but how children approach the world is that they deal with the joy and the sadness, and they can move between them sort of very quickly. And yeah, I thought they were funny, and I didn't have as many when I did a first version of the book. And then my editor was like, yeah, these are really funny. You should put in more of these. And I was like, yeah, say no more. Say no more.
I love them.
In your book, family is very important. Does this reflect your life?
It does, actually. I'm very close to my family. I don't know if you guys are allowed phones, but we're not all in the same country, but we have a WhatsApp group. And like, we're always sending each other pictures and like, this is what I'm doing today. And this is what and we have so many different versions of the same group. It's actually really silly. So I have one with just my siblings and their spouses. Then I have one with my siblings and their spouses and the parents. And then I have one with just my sisters. And then I have one, I have like 5 or 6 different WhatsApp groups for the same family. So yeah, we grew up close. I think that's something that I find, and I'm not just close to my nuclear family. In Nigeria, your concept of family is not just your parents and your brothers and siblings and all of that. It's also your extended family. So as I said, I grew up with a lot of my cousins. They lived with us, and that was the way it was. And it's definitely something I want to explore more in the second Mayowa book about sort of a more Nigerian version of family. Because at the moment, Mayowa's family is very much a nuclear family. It's my mom, my dad, it's my grandpa, my dad's dad, and my mom's dad. And yes, she's going to find a more Nigerian version of family as well in the next book.
And do we know when the next book is coming? Because we're all very keen.
Yes.
No. I mean, I hope you guys will not be at the end of your secondary school by the time it comes. And even if you are, I hope you still read it. But I'm working on it. I'm writing it. And I mean, it's interesting. I've never written a trilogy before. Each one of my books has always been standalone. And so what I've been doing is a lot of thinking about how you keep the same character, but they also change and grow and evolve, which is what happens to human beings, right? And I mean, my husband and I, we always like joke, there's some TV series that the way a character is in season 1, they're still the exact same person, like by season 10 or 11. And so it's like, no, well, I mean, yes, there are certain things about you that don't change, but also there are lots of things about you that change. So I think that's what I'm thinking about with Mayowa as she goes from 10 to 11. And yes, closely observing my nieces and nephews, those sort of small
Oh.
changes that start happening as they go through the years.
Was it deliberate that you chose the character who's an MP as a bad guy?
I have nothing against MPs. I mean, that's the thing, because you've asked me, both of you have asked me about, was this deliberate? Did you do that on purpose? And like, of course, I wrote the book, but then deliberate makes it sound very formal. For me, when I write, I sort of inch forward, sort of chapter by chapter in the story. And so the book started off about being about Lagos altering. And so I wrote that was what the initial concept was, this story about this image of an old man jumping on a book and there's a young girl looking on. So it's about how this magic power that they have, that they can unleash the emotions stored in books. So I wrote all of that. And then the next question then became, okay, well then what is this going to do in the real world outside of just Mayowa and her grandfather? And then because I'm interested in politics and like I'm reading the news and I'm seeing what's happening around me just as I'm writing the book, then it becomes, oh, what about this theme about refugees? And then you listen to how some politicians are talking. And I remember at the time, probably what sparked this very controversially, there was an MP, I can't remember who referred to refugees either as a swarm or a horde. Like they used a word that is usually reserved for non-humans, basically. And I remember there was a massive uproar about it. And so again, that must have been, so I don't know, I don't remember who this MP was, but yeah, maybe they were the spark.
We would love to write a book review. Can we send it to you? And would you consider publishing it in some form?
Oh, yes, please. I would love to see your book review. I was telling my publisher, I mean this, that on the paperback, we shouldn't have, you know how sometimes on books you see like The Guardian says like terrific or whatever. We should have on the paperback, obviously, if you think it's terrific, amazing, wonderful, Millie and Lucas. We should have. I was like, who cares what the Guardian thinks? The average Guardian reader is not like a reader of children's books. So we should have endorsement. So yes, of course, yes, please send it to me. And I mean I can put it on my Instagram. That's sort of like I could publish it on that.
And we can definitely put it on our Love Reading site as well. Yeah. Yes. Weren't they fantastic questions? Absolutely
Yes.
brilliant. And it's been an absolutely wonderful discussion. Is there some I'm conscious of the time, but is there something you said you had some questions for Millie and Lucas?
Yeah. Tell me what you thought about the book. How did you find it like action-y enough for you?
I thought that the book, I liked the book because it has different cultures in it. So some books have like the same culture in it. They're just in like England and they're English, and it's a bit boring sometimes. But I like that you've put in people from different cultures, sort of like but not just from different cultures who like they have maybe disabilities, but that doesn't stop them. And I thought that the book sort of reflected, so with the vote bill and everything, I thought it reflected on so like protests and real life situations that people have to face.
Yeah, I like politics, and also I like the variation of like we get to learn about people that need help that aren't being given. And on the news they they make it sound like in a way that they're in the right, but it's good to see when the actual truth.
That's
Wow.
fantastic. Yeah. I mean,
Sounding.
what would you say to somebody about who was thinking about buying this book? Do you think, I mean, I think it's absolutely phenomenal, and you should get out there and buy it as soon as possible. Mayowa and the Sea of Words by Chibundu Onuzo, published by Bloomsbury on June the 20th. Start queuing now, folks. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely lovely. It's been a real pleasure to meet you, Millie and Lucas. You've done your school proud.
Very.
Magnificent readers, and it's been a real delight to meet you, Chibundu. And I can't wait for book 2, but I'll be very patient, honestly, I promise. Thank you so much.
You.